Greetings, fellow classmates. My name is Michael Schroeder. Thank you for watching this presentation. It is on Chapter 18, Organization Culture. I hope you enjoy it and I hope you learned something from it. Let's begin. First, we're going to talk about some common attributes that are involved in organizational culture. One, there are a lot of definitions about it, but the common factors remain that the various definitions refer to a set of values held by individuals in an organization, which basically means every person has a perception that they bring to the overall organizational culture. A second common aspect is that some values and aspects are taken for granted. This is easily illustrated by, for instance, if you go to get a job, normally you don't have to be told, hey, don't steal from the company or don't lie to your boss. It's understood to be true. People already know that, and so that it's not written down, it's not in the code of ethics, kind of things like that sometimes, and other things are just taken for granted that you won't find written down anywhere in the organization. Thirdly, cultural definitions are sometimes conveyed through various means of symbolically, because it's just easier to describe things in a story sometimes than it is to spell it out in a sentence or by facts. That's how culture is. So sometimes it's more described through a story than through anything else. Next, we're going to talk about the difference between organizational climate and organizational culture. Organizational climate, you can think of it as more temporary. Culture is a little bit more permanent. We'll first talk about some of the similarities. Now, both of those deal with the social context in organizations. Both affect behaviors of people, and both are concerned with the overall work atmosphere. And that's kind of where the separation, the commonalities end. They can be mistaken for the same thing a lot of times, but they are definite differences. Again, like we talked about, climate is more passing, it's more temporary, and basically it's based out of psychology and it's based on individual perception. So it's going to change more over time with who you get in the workplace at any given time. It's also based on the current atmosphere of attitudes and feelings. And again, that is very temporary, it's very easy to change. For instance, kind of silly, but if you bring in a cake to work, people are going to feel happy, attitudes and feelings are going to go up, and there's going to be morale and people are going to be happy. Next day, it's back to normal. Organization culture is a little bit different. There's a good definition from that in our textbook. It says, the means through which people in the organization learn to communicate what is acceptable and unacceptable in an organization. Basically, its values and its norms. Now, organization culture is based in sociology and in historical context. So the organizational culture is built off of past experiences, past precedents, and historical context based on various situations. The takeaway from all this is that organizational culture is harder to alter. We'll touch on that a little bit later in the presentation as well, but that's the big takeaway. Organizational culture is harder to alter than just the climate. So how do you really develop an organizational culture? Well, the textbook also gives some very good steps to do that. This is basically from a managerial perspective, but also can apply to various levels of employees and other people in the organization. First step. Formulate strategic values and goals. This basically means you need to create a vision and an overall goal for your organization. Where do you want the organization to go? Where do you want it to be? What kind of service do you want to provide? Those type of questions. Number two, develop strategic cultural values that are compatible with those strategic values. Basically, you need to bridge the gap between your strategic values and your cultural values and make them compatible with each other. Third, you need to create a vision and share it with the other employees. Basically, you need to communicate in such a way where those employees can grab a hold of it, understand it, and assimilate it, and then kind of apply it. If you can get dedicated employees that know the vision and support it, they'll be much more dedicated to the organization and to you, and they'll be more efficient as well. Step 4, initiate implementation strategies that allow the cultural values to establish roots. Now this is important because otherwise, if you don't foster that culture, it's probably not going to develop or not going to develop as you want it to. Fifth, you want managers and employees to reinforce cultural behaviors that are consistent with the organization's strategy and goals. Basically, again, you kind of have to nurture that culture, you have to reinforce it, and that comes from a managerial perspective, but also from the employee perspective. Everyone needs to come behind this and reinforce the culture that is desired. Now there's some different types of values that we also need to discuss. We already talked a little bit about strategic values. The definition from that the book gives is the basic beliefs about an organization's environment that shape its strategy. Now this is important again, it's kind of that overall strategic vision on where you want the organization to be and how you want your organization to work. Cultural values are a little bit different. They are the values employees need to have and to act on for the organization to carry out its strategic values. Again, really, if you want those two to work together, you have to bridge them and make them compatible, or else you're going to wind up with an organization that has basically an empty culture that's not fully developed and is not fully effective either. Now, organizational cultures is kind of difficult to define in various settings because every single organization is different, every manager is different, every employee is different, and frankly, just based on time and other situations, every situation is different. So how do you really compare them or evaluate them or say which one's better than another? Well, there are a few frameworks that attempt to do just that. The UCHI framework compares U.S. firms, Japanese firms, and then what they call Type Z firms. Type Z firms is basically almost a hybrid between a U.S. firm and a Japanese firm. They say that U.S. firms tend to be very operations focused, very product related, whereas Japanese firms tend to be very employee and holistically minded and more collective. Type Z is kind of a hybrid in the middle of those two mediums. The UCHI framework evaluates organizational cultures based on 7 aspects. 1, commitment to employees. 2, evaluation. 3, careers. 4, control. 5, decision making. 6, responsibility. And 7, concern for people. Now, all things being said, the UCHI framework concludes that Japanese and Type Z firms tend to outperform the average U.S. firm because they invest in their employees and the operations side. They don't just focus on the operations and they don't just focus on the employees, but they kind of focus on both. The key from that I have is that in order for your organization to be successful and to really be super strong, you need to invest in your employees and not just the organization or your product that you're creating. Now there's another framework that is useful to describing what makes a successful organizational culture, and that's called the Peters and Waterman framework. And basically it does describe various things that make an organizational culture effective. 1, there's a bias for action, which basically means the organization is willing to make decisions and not just stand still. 2, they want to stay close to the customer, so they value the customer and they make sure that the customer knows that. 3, they value autonomy and entrepreneurship, basically, they're not afraid to try something new and try to be on that cutting edge of technology or whatever. 4, productivity through people. They value their employees and the employees know that they are valued. 5, there's hands-on management, so the managers are very involved with the employees. They're not just standoff or up on some high plateau. Also, 6, they stick to the knitting, which basically means the organization sticks to their areas of expertise and they make that their strong point. 7, these cultures have simple form and lean staff. So they have everything that they need, but they don't just have lots of excess. They keep it nice and lean. And then finally 8, simultaneously loose and tight organization, which basically means they have tight, strong culture together. They also have freedom in that strong culture and tight organization. Freedom for the employees to practice some things, to try some new things, and kind of experiment, and kind of add their own spin and area of expertise to a product or at least a process. So what are some managerial considerations with organizational cultures? One of the big central issues that I find is how to manage your existing cultural system, because culture is prevalent in every single organization, so how are you going to best manage that? In order to do that, you need to be fully aware of the cultural values and the behaviors that those values support. You need the ability to articulate your organization's values. Again, kind of that vision, you need to be able to share that with your employees. 3, you need to develop an organizational socialization, which basically that means it's the process of employees learning their organization's culture and passing their knowledge and understanding on to others. So kind of thinking between the lines, how do you really apply all this? What do you suppose a manager should do if they find themselves in an organization that has performance-reducing values? It's kind of harmful. Well, obviously they should try to fix it. The difficulty comes is that involves changing people's perspectives about the organization, how it functions, and the organization's goals. It can be very hard to change people's minds, as I'm sure you're all aware of. Also, that manager would have to create a cultural shift, which is a long and difficult process. Kind of like we've already talked about, culture is hard to change and you can't just do it overnight. Some keys, like we've talked about, for that manager would be to establish goals, provide clear direction, be very consistent in various situations, and reinforce that desired culture. One of the big takeaways from all of this is to be consistent. If you're not consistent, employees won't know what to expect, your culture won't be as consistent, and neither will your organization. Now, the question I have for you all that I look forward to hearing your responses is kind of a two-part question. One, what is your organization's culture like? And two, how can you improve your organization's culture? I'm very interested to hear your responses because everyone can make a change, whether it's in the world, whether it's in your family, whether it's in your organization. So my question is, how can you improve your organization's culture? Thank you very much.